Hello, and welcome to EmoryTales. This week's story is The Fangs Between, Chapter 2, Osudeni. Let us begin. A steady click-clack from hard-soled boots as they trod echoed in the empty hallway. The man seemed out of place, his loose-fit blue jeans and untucked black button-up casting a hard contrast in the sterile white corridor. His sleeves were rolled just above the elbow, and the first few buttons on his shirt were undone. On his bald head sat a pair of goggles with pure black lenses. The man walked on the left side of the hall and kept his left hand on the pommel of his arming sword, which hung just below his hip. On the other hip he carried a mammoth of a pistol, a Smith & Wesson 460. To round out his look, the man wore polished black tanker boots. The oak doors opened before the man could reach up to knock. It had been just over a year since he was last called to the Osudeni regional headquarters, which was when he had been recognized as a blackguard. There were no upward promotions left on his path, so Savin did not know why HQ would call him in. He walked to the center of the room and stepped up onto the unlit dais. After a few moments, the lights behind the council flared to life, momentarily blinding him. Once his eyes had adjusted, the man nodded to each of the 5 venerable warriors that sat arrayed before him. "I am Blackguard Savin. I have come at the request of the noble hand." With that said, the man knelt and lowered his head. "I carry the burden of Marbus, Grigori, and Ashma." The council checked over their monitors once more, and each gave their final approval before any of them spoke. "The noble hand has a task for you, Savin. You are to slay a vampire." Savin started to raise his head to speak, but he caught himself. The custodian who spoke noticed the small motion, then offered, "You wonder why a blackguard is being called to destroy a vampire?" He remembered not to raise his head this time. "Yes, I know it's for good reason, but wouldn't any inquisitor do for the task? And why would I be called to this council for a simple task, honorable custodian?" "You are right to question, Blackguard. This is no ordinary bambino vampire. This one is of Dracula's lineage," the custodian to his right said. Savin's head swam at the thought. All of Dracula's progeny were in Europe or Asia, with one exception. A black stain on the Osudeni. Arnold Paule was one of the greatest inquisitors in the order's long history. But in 1726, he murdered one of the 4 sisters belonging to Dracula and took her blood, making himself a vampire. His was a bastard line of the famed vampire, but a powerful line nonetheless. "We found Paule?" The young man nearly choked on the words. The thought bothered him. Even if he had a pact with 3 demons, he doubted his ability to face down Paule single-handedly. A custodian to his left spoke. "No, Paule still eludes us for the time being. However, in 1816 he turned Daniel Bechter, a plantation owner in Pennsylvania. Make no mistake, this vampire is anything but ordinary. He is only 2 generations removed from the Prince of Darkness. He has survived 200 years without detection. You will be tested, Blackguard." Savin sneered in disgust at the thought of one of Paule's progeny. He had slain over a dozen vampires in his very brief 3 years as an inquisitor. Most of them were over 7 generations removed from their dark lord. Every bloodsucker needed a short period of observation before being destroyed. Each had proven to have more and varied weaknesses beyond their makers. Often, the easiest way to track a vampire's lineage was through these flaws. The maker always passed on their weaknesses to those they turned. Every successive generation was more epicene than the one before. The custodian seated center right was next to speak. "All relevant information has been sent to your account. This council hereby charges the Blackguard Savin with the destruction of Daniel Bechter. Embrace the dark, Blackguard." "Deny the demon, honorable custodian." Savin rose to his feet and sharply turned and left the room. Embrace the dark, deny the demon. It was an old parting spoken in nearly every language. It had become almost a creed that the Osudeni lived by. They embraced the dark by making pacts with demons to empower themselves to fight the evils of the world. Every day was a battle against those same demons to retain their humanity. The organization changed its name over the centuries, always adopting the newest member nation's language, but the name was always condemned. No one within the Osudeni had any illusion of their fate. When they died, they were going to their hell, or whatever name it carried in their heart. Saven had made 3 pacts thus far. The first was with Marbas, which granted him the ability to see anywhere he had been before by looking into polished obsidian. The second pact was with one of the Grigori. This pact granted him the ability to open portals to anywhere he could see, but only if both places were unlit. His last pact, and the one that was the hardest for him, was with ch2. ch2's power gave Saven lightning reflexes. Once in testing, he was able to fend off 7 men. The price for each pact was the same. Saven offered the dark entity the right to contend for control of his body. The real price, however, was that by making these pacts, the Osudeni damned themselves willingly. There would be no peace at war's end for them. He walked the long, well-lit hall accompanied by the click-clack of his boots and his thoughts. This wouldn't be the oldest vampire he had ever faced, but being only 2 generations separated from their master was a cause for concern. The target, Daniel Bechter, wouldn't have many weaknesses that Saven could exploit, and he had never faced a vampire above the 5th generation before. It was common knowledge for any inquisitor that Paole couldn't survive in temperatures above 70 degrees. His body would begin rotting, so there was that Saven could try to use, but trying to lure a vampire into a fatal situation rarely worked. Beyond that, the young blackguard knew nothing about his quarry. Yet. Saven peeked into a conference room in the corridor and saw it was empty. He stepped in and closed the door, then turned off the lights. He pulled down his goggles and used the obsidian lenses to look into his bedroom, then opened a portal and stepped through. Walking out of his bedroom, Saven unbuckled his pistol belt and laid it on his kitchen table. He then removed his sword belt and hung it from the back of his kitchen chair. His apartment was small, but it was cheap. The kitchen and the living room were the same room, outfitted with the very basics: a worn old brown couch, a card table set up in the kitchen, and a single folding chair. The fridge, his first stop, was stocked with little more than beer, ground beef, and some salad dressing. His cupboards weren't much better, sporting a random assortment of noodles and ramen. The kitchen was equipped with the very minimum: a stove, fridge, and a sink. The man owned 3 bowls, 1 pot, 1 pan, a spoon, a fork, a knife, and a single glass. The yellowed walls showed years of being occupied by smokers. The linoleum floor held up well, though. There was some simple pattern on it, but Saven had never taken the time to notice it. The living room was a large patch of dark tan carpet in front of the door to the building's hallway. There wasn't much else there except for a lamp sitting on an end table by the door. The bathroom was small but freshly painted, white with blue flecks. He found it calming. Over the last year, he had all but replaced the entire bathroom after talking to his landlady. The room was weirdly modern in contrast to the 60s retro of the main room. There was a new smooth contour sink, a 2-week-old shower stall, and a tankless toilet. It was an island of refuge for him from the mundanity of the living room. The vanity mirror over the sink was a bit out of place, but he liked the way the light looked in his eyes, so he wasn't inclined to change it again anytime soon. The products in the room were practically an homage to the 80s. Everything was either Old Spice, Stetson, or Crest. He walked to the front door and took off his boots, then to the fridge and grabbed his preferred beverage. He opened the beer and tossed the cap in a small trash can under his sink, then walked into his bedroom and flicked on the light. This was his prime sanctum, a king-size bed with 1,000-count silk sheets, a handmade black comforter with a blue sword emblazoned on it. It was a gift from a man he had saved from a fire while watching a werewolf pack some years ago. 4 pillows with silk covers, a small 5-drawer mahogany dresser containing everything he needed: socks, underwear, shirts, pants, and books. On the opposite side of the room was the only thing more expensive than his bathroom: his computer. The small desk struggled to support the 82-inch monitor placed atop it. Under it was what the geeky kid down the hall called the most bussin' box ever built. Though Savin didn't understand the terminology, he assumed it meant the kid was proud of building it. Thus far, the computer had served him well, but having oil in it seemed odd. Something about cooling. Sitting on his bed, Savin reached down and turned on his bussin' box and logged into the Osudeni site and went straight to his new access files. There were 3 photos of a tall, slender, well-dressed blond man with blue eyes. Daniel's facial features were sharp and handsome, but repugnant at the same time. How could such a creature be both disgusting and beautiful at the same time? He wondered, then scrolled past the pictures. It didn't take long for Savin to realize the investigations division hadn't found anything on Daniel yet. Born unknown, raised unknown, died 1816. Huh, the year Frankenstein was written, he mused, then continued reading. Height 6 foot to 6'4", weight 180 pounds approximate. There was a brief snippet about his wife and 2 children, but nothing relevant. It was recently identified that his maker was Arnold Pauli, a name Savin knew well. All inquisitors are taught about the tactics he developed, as well as his fall to vampirism. Great, this told me just about nothing, he thought, then closed the site. Next, he connected to the Bluetooth speaker in his bathroom and turned on some music. The next 2 hours were spent working out: push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups on his bedroom door frame. Then it was out the door for a run around the block. A few times at increasing pace, that was, until Savin managed to get Marbus back under control. Once he was back in his apartment, it only took seconds for Ashma to begin pressing on Savin's psyche, and the man took up his sword, unsheathed it, and began working his way through sword drills for the next hour until he could barely lift the blade at all. An hour later, he stepped out of his shower and wiped his mirror clean. He took a few minutes to appreciate his own visage, a small concession he had made to the will of the lustful Grigori he had made a pact with. Savin's once very simple hygiene routine had been slowly altered to include skin care and daily cologne, as well as demanding he keeps clean-shaven. There was a benefit that this ever-evolving routine boosted his confidence and forced him to acknowledge himself as more than a weapon sacrificed to fend off the monsters of the world. It was also a nice addition that Grigori helped fend off Marbus's demands to grow and keep a beard. The exhausted man walked back to his room after drying off and flopped down on his bed. Hey, we know you've been a demon hunter for a year, but we need you to hunt this vampire. Yeah, it's 200 years old. Oh, did we mention it's Dracula's fucking great-grandchild? Savin slammed his fist on the bed. What is this shit show? The damn investigations division doesn't know jack about this guy. He frowned to himself. Complaining about it wouldn't help the situation at all. He had no intel, not even a location to work with. The part about it all that concerned him the most was that he was being sent alone to deal with this threat. What did the noble hand know that he wasn't being told? Was Bector actually weak or something? It wasn't possible. He was a 4th-generation vampire. According to what he learned while he was an Inquisitor, a 4th gen should be strong enough to tear a human in half if they want to. Savin closed his eyes and reviewed his mental notes. The lowest generation encountered in the last century was a third gen. In that incident, the vampire flipped an '87 Dodge Ram and killed 2 Inquisitors before escaping the last 3. Inquisitor Thorson had been recorded moving over 50 miles an hour, but the vamp was able to outrun him. All vampires are immortal. The only way to keep one down is to stake it, cut off its head, and rebury it with its head face down, packed with garlic. He would need to get his hands on some ash or yew if he wanted to get the job done right. Running water had been debunked in the 1800s. Silver wouldn't help. Sunlight was a great way to drain their power, but good luck getting a vampire to fight you in the sunlight. With Arnold's known weakness to temperature, there was little chance Daniel would be willing to stand his ground on a warm summer's night, or even fight in an overly warm building. A crucifix blessed by an abbot with true faith would be useful, but the second he goes near a church or an abbey, the daughters of Calmet will be hounding him for months, so that's off the table. Fire is always on the table, but it's situational, slow, and high risk. The man grumbled and turned off his music, then brought up the images of Daniel Bechter again and stared at them. After a few minutes, a small detail caught his attention. Nothing Daniel wore was gold. Earrings, rings, watch, necklace, none of it was gold. It was known silver inhibited a vampire's ability to heal, but he'd never seen a wealthy vampire avoid gold. This could be useful, but enough looking at this thing. He shuts off his computer and laid back on his bed. Tomorrow would be a busy day for him. He would need to acquire an ash or yew stake and reach out to his contacts for anything they could dig up about this new vampire. Once he knew where to look, he would need to check for other extra-normal activity in the area and check for activity within the daughters around the region. The last thing he wanted was for this to become more complicated by having a run-in with the murder nuns. Savin wondered if he had the internal strength to take on another demon. He could use another advantage against this vampire. He shook the thought away. The 3 he had pacts with were wearing away at him enough as is. He didn't need a 4th entity trying to take over his life from him, and only Arnold Paulet had ever succeeded in contracting 4 demons at the same time. The man sighed. He had next to no information to take on a creature he didn't believe he could fight alone. He shook his head and dismissed his doubts, then said, "I don't need another demon, and I'm not in competition with Paulet. Now stay out of my thoughts." He crawled under his comforter and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be a busy day indeed, with so much to learn and do. And this threat needed to be dealt with as quickly as possible. It still bothered him that the noble hand was sending him alone to deal with it, though. And that is the end of Chapter 2. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this content, please consider leaving a like and a comment. If you want more content like this, hit that subscribe button. If you'd like to help the channel grow, consider sharing this video or becoming a Patreon. Link in the description.